Hello everyone, it's so good to be here yet again. I just came back from the cinema after seeing Exhuma, a film that honestly I had zero idea whatsoever what it was about, and it seems like nobody's talking about it. And even though I barely knew anything about the film, apart from that it's a supernatural horror film from South Korea, that was more than enough for me, if for no other reason than just South Korea being on this legendary win streak of putting out these classic films such as Bong Joon-ho's Parasite, of course, that masterpiece. Then there are other equally great films like Burning, or most recently, Decision to Leave. Literally one instant classic after another. Now, of course, I'm not so unreasonable as to set expectations for any filmmaker quite so impossibly high, but nonetheless, my spice senses were tingling about this film. And I'm glad I followed my gut instinct because there's a lot of great content here. So to briefly go with the film synopsis, because truly I want to give as few details as I can about this film because there's quite a few really neat surprises buried in this film. We follow a renowned Korean shaman and her protege that are hired to identify the source of this illness that plagues this very rich Korean-American family. Turns out that there's a curse revolving around one of their ancestors' spirits, so they have been tasked to relocate the grave of this ancestor in hopes to appeasing this vengeful spirit. Our two shamans get the extra help from a mortician and a Feng Shui master who, by the way, is easily my favorite character of this film, and I'm pretty sure will be everyone's favorite. Because lo and behold, I had no idea going to this film, but he is played by a sensational Choi Min-sik. Now, in case you're unaware, this is the man who played the protagonist in Old Boy, as well he was a serial killer in I Saw the Devil. Two classic Korean films. Old Boy in particular is obviously the most famous film, because indeed I Saw the Devil is perhaps a little too fucked up for your average Joe viewer, but nonetheless I highly recommend it because it is a great crime thriller. Anyways, back to the plot of the film. As you can imagine, this exhumation, where the title of the film Exhuma comes from, and I'll just leave it at that because it is quite a delicious mystery for you all to uncover, and I don't want to ruin that for you. And indeed, in terms of tone, at least for the first half of the film, I find it's much more centered around mystery, and it's very slow build up where the plot slowly unfolds itself as we learn more things. And indeed, this film is loaded to the brim with Korean mysticism, superstition, and lore, which was a wonderful and fascinating cinematic cultural trip for me to take. And indeed, the rituals performed by two shamans are spellbinding to say the least. It is quite the visual and auditory feast for cinema goers. Now, as I alluded to before, it is a little bit of a slow burn, so it takes a while for things to get going, especially for the horror elements to start setting in. And once these horror elements do start to emerge in the film, they're rather subtle, until they're not, that is. Obviously, I won't spoil any of the juicy details, but I do want to share an amusing anecdote from this particular screening. As we were reaching this climactic fever-pitch moment in the film, this family walks in, this mother and father, and their little daughter, who's, I don't know, maybe like 7, 8 years old, is just horror-struck looking at the scene, dazzled, looking around like, I think we're in the wrong room. We're all like, yeah, get out of here. Poor thing, I hope she's okay. Anyways, as usual, I digress. Anecdote aside, indeed the horror elements are rather slow and very brooding and atmospheric, which I think worked to great effect. And indeed, on the topic of atmosphere, I love how the element of nature is used towards this massive tonal shift in the film, which is triggered by one particularly bad omen, where as of that moment, just clouds start just slowly setting in. And it doesn't feel all that supernatural, but you know that, okay, something's going on here. And then when the rain starts setting in, this isn't just a change in the environment for aesthetic reasons. It has such deep meaning that is integrated into the story and horror aesthetics, and you can see the weight and reality of it dawning on our four protagonists here. Really powerful stuff, especially given the fact that it's normally a rather mundane and low budget element that is put to great effect in this context. And I will say that there's a very clever way that the horror is teased throughout the film. Once again, I don't want to give away any details, so as vague as possible, because I do think it's important for me to just express my fascination with their method here. I love how they show the this window to the soul, into that spirit world, if you will. I'll just leave it at that, but that was very cool. Once again, very subtle and clever. And as far as the art direction goes, there's a lot to love here. All the props and color palette are super well chosen, and I particularly love the locations. The first scene where we traverse through the burial site with our Feng Shui master is just a delight to behold. Every single element of nature, the animals, the burial site itself, the view, all of it has so much meaning. It was fantastic use of that environment. The hospital morgue as well is quite the landmark and has a very eerie atmosphere. Again, without going into details, but some of the coffins we've seen in this film have really cool designs. I'll just leave it at that. But my god, that I love the texture and the sculptured elements of them. Stop, my check it out for yourselves. And then there's this rundown Buddhist temple that's like integrated into this like farm village. That as I was watching the film, I couldn't have my mind help going to references of like Resident Evil 4 or Resident Evil Village. And I mean that in the best way possible. So the risk that I start getting a little too excited and giving away more details than necessary, I'll start wrapping things up. But before I do that, if I had to be a little bit critical, I do find that for a horror film, it's not all that scary. Yes, it's very tense, atmospheric, and eerie. In that regard, it's aces. But as far as the horror elements go, it's not all that terrifying. Also, I do find the film was maybe a little on the long side. There was a moment actually where I thought the film was going to wrap up and credit roll quite earlier, and it wouldn't necessarily have shocked me, but then the film comes back with a vengeance, and there are plenty of fantastic sequences that come after that. But even so, there are a few elements in the last acts of the film that I found were starting to drag and repeat themselves a little bit too much, perhaps. Not at the end of the world, of course. I was still quite invigorated by the experience overall, but there are maybe some pacing issues that could have been ironed out. And finally, the only real visual element that kind of rubs me the wrong way in this film is this rather uncanny use of CGI with the foxes in particular. And there's some pretty wild things we see in this movie, but when it comes to these animals specifically, they did kind of break my immersion and remind me that, hey, I'm here watching a movie, which is kind of hilarious given the fact that this is a supernatural ghost story. What, that part didn't remind you that you're watching a movie? But anyways, but otherwise, I think the film is great. This is a fascinating ritualistic view into a superstitious South Korea. And really, I have to sing high praises to the entire cast, not just to our four protagonists, but also to all the side characters that we encounter throughout the film. They all play their role serviceably. And really, our four musketeers here have a great camaraderie and chemistry. You really do feel like they're a team that just works together and there's a sense of trust between them. There's a moment where the four of them get in the car and they're like, okay, let's talk this over. We've seen some things. We all want to use our own expertise to analyze this. And even though the tone of the film is quite slow and dark and brooding, their chemistry is so strong that they're able to have these comedic banters between each other and it doesn't break the flow or the uniformity of the overall experience of the film. And of course, this is a very eerie and surprising tale. Once again, I thought the film was over at one point, but then it comes back with a vengeance with a heap of surprises that you probably won't see coming. So I'm going to give this a rock solid 8.5 out of 10. Sometimes when you walk into a film, you have no idea what you're getting for. It might be a dud, but this one was kind of a banger. And I'm also surprised to learn after having seen the film that this is the highest grossing South Korean film in 2024. Apparently it has 95 million in the bag from the box office, which is kind of awesome for this under the radar film that nobody seems to be talking about, which incidentally, why is there this radio silence? This film definitely deserves to be exhumed and see the light of day. Pun totally intended. So with all that being said, wishing you and your loved ones nothing but the best. Take care and talk to you soon.